In March 2023, Nintendo shut down their 3DS and Wii U eShops, which has resulted in forever lost media, along with the hard work that went into making them. Regardless of how you may feel about some old video games, this concept of removing access to these games forever just comes to highlight the potential for lost history. In a similar manner to Nintendo, Sony has tried to shut down its PS3, PS Vita, and PSP stores in 2021, but they reversed their position due to fan outcry. The Nintendo and Sony stories have resulted in renewed interest in the video game preservation sector, with the Video Game History Foundation publicly slamming these two companies for being actively destructive to video game history. That same Video Game History Foundation had also conducted the first ever study on the commercial availability of classic video games. This study, released in summer of 2023, was done in partnership with the Software Preservation Network, and its results are bleak. It was revealed that 87% of classic video games released in the US are critically endangered. But in order to properly discuss why video game preservation is important, it is necessary to highlight the importance of historical preservation to begin with. As you may know, our understanding of history is partly due to the study of artifacts that represent a culture's past. Whether it's something small like a tool made out of stone or the Great Pyramids of Giza, these artifacts help us understand our ancestors and history. The loss of these historic artifacts and structures not only represents a loss in identity of culture, but also of information of culture in the past. There's so much to learn through the preservation of these everyday objects and sacred structures, and that includes pieces of media such as music, film, and video games. But video games are a different beast to movies, and while both mediums require a device to play on, video games are much more strict from both a legal and technical perspective. Films don't care what they play on as long as the disc, the tape, etc. can be read and projected onto a screen. It'll work. Video games have to talk to an operating system. They need a minimum amount of space and memory and often only inherently work on a specific device. That last point implies that should the last of these devices be destroyed, the art along with it is lost too. And it gets further complicated as some games use certain peripherals that can also be hard to come by. Take Time Crisis for example, an arcade game that requires a physical gun and pedal system for its gameplay. There's also just the apathetic attitude by game publishers to preserve source code of their games, with one notable example being the Silent Hill HD collection by Konami, where the source code of the games were lost. So instead, they found an unfinished build and published that instead. But the last nail in the coffin when it comes to video game preservation comes from public opinion on this medium. While more recently games have started to be regarded as art, this was not always the case. Games have constantly been treated as merely a means for entertainment. Not only has that tainted the perception of games as art, but it has also prevented games from getting the same preservation options as other forms of art. Books, music, and films are preserved as art forms through governmental measures, including efforts by the Library of Congress to save and categorize new works annually. This ensures future generations have access to a diverse array of art, fostering ongoing inspiration and creativity. However, video games don't receive the same level of preservation efforts. The Video Game History Foundation aims to change this and bring the same hopeful optimism to the preservation of video games. There are many who may not be aware of video game preservation efforts, and there are some who may not even be familiar with the process of preserving forms of art. It is a shame that this process is not better explained for fans everywhere, because the results of these efforts benefit everyone. The phrase video game preservation is pretty much self-explanatory and describes efforts to preserve video games. However, the actual process is much more complicated and difficult, and it requires some knowledge of art preservation to fully understand. Basically, the Library of Congress curates a diverse collection of art, including video games, to preserve it for future generations. Museums also contribute to preservation efforts, sometimes featuring video games in exhibits. Copyright laws support local libraries in lending books, movies, and albums to the public. But despite these efforts, video game preservation is lacking. The Video Game History Foundation reports that only 13% of games are preserved, with less than 3% of games released before 1985 being available today. This figure excludes games released after 2010, highlighting the significant gap in video game preservation. The study points out the Commodore 64 is particularly lacking in terms of game availability. It describes the system as an abandoned ecosystem due to the extremely limited options for experiencing C64 games. The study goes on to describe the Game Boy family of games as a neglected ecosystem. The family of systems at one point had roughly 6.5% of its library available on the Wii U and 3DS eShop, but now that those services have shut down, that number is much less. The Video Game History Foundation is working to find ways to make these historic pieces more available for people and have them regarded as important forms of artistic expression that deserve to be preserved. Unfortunately, there are several barriers standing in the way of better video game preservation. The chief obstacle facing video game preservation is the Entertainment Software Association, or the ESA. The ESA is the main lobbying group for the video game industry and have repeatedly and successfully argued that the video game industry does enough for video game preservation without outside interference. Based on the study from the Video Game History Foundation, that could not be further from the truth. Game studios are starting to embrace digital markets, and many games released on recent generations of consoles have been made available on modern systems or received ports or remakes. More console developers have also embraced backwards compatibility, which has made it easier for fans to continue to play games even after upgrading a console. Despite all of this, the study proves that there are still far too many games that are not available on modern platforms, and there are even less options when trying to experience retro games. The ESA may be the chief barrier for video game preservation, but there are still others. While the secondary market of gaming is thriving and continuing to grow, it poses its own struggles for video game preservation. Anyone who's a retro gaming collector can attest that it's an expensive hobby, and the excessive cost of purchasing retro consoles and games makes it all that much more difficult for people trying to experience them. Likewise, there are digital markets available, but they are not as beneficial as some may think. Sony recently decided to extend support of the PS3 and PS Vita digital stores, but they're not upheld with the highest quality. And lastly, licensed games bring an entirely new issue to preservation. Developers seldom hold rights over a licensed game, and that means that the rights holder of an IP can decide to pull a licensed game from a digital market whenever they see fit. All of these make it more difficult for a reliable way to preserve and protect games for future enjoyment. Some fans may be quick to point out that dozens of the most influential video games of all time are very much available in some form on modern platforms. They may also argue that emulation is an option for those who desperately want to experience older retro games that have not been ported or updated. Unfortunately, neither of these offer to help the ongoing effort of video game preservation. Many influential games like Doom and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time are available, but the thousands of other games that are not as well regarded, best-selling or influential are stuck in limbo. However, that doesn't make them any less important than the bigger games. The Silent Hill HD Collection. We've mentioned earlier in this video the Silent Hill franchise and the catastrophe of the lost source code. The Silent Hill franchise is a largely PlayStation franchise, with Silent Hill 2 being considered one of the best horror games of all time. When the Silent Hill HD Collection was released, many people were shocked at the state of the game. It was as if the game was somehow unfinished. Turns out, it was. Konami lost the original source code for each of the Silent Hill games and handed it to a developer to fix and release. Many argue that Konami could have hired a team such as Bluepoint, who reverse engineer old games where the original source code was lost. But this isn't a perfect solution. Reverse engineering source code is extremely difficult and time-consuming, and the end result may not be the same as the original. If one were to reverse engineer the Silent Hill games, it may have some changes that weren't present in its original rendition. As a series as popular and influential as Silent Hill, the loss of their source code can only spell bad news for their preservation. Darkspore. Darkspore was a Diablo-like looter game that took place in the universe of Spore. Released in 2011, critics largely thought Darkspore was an okay game, leading to an average Metacritic score of 65. You may be wondering why we're choosing to provide a bit more information on how the game is, and there is reason for that. You literally cannot play the game anymore. No, really, you can't play it at all. Even if you have the disc or bought it on EA's Origin service, you can't play the game. This is because the game ran on an always online DRM service even if you wanted to play offline. This game also needed to verify with a server before it would even start up. Those servers have been closed since 2016, and Darkspore along with it. So developers who spent their hard work on the game, and even players who saw the game as something truly special, have been negatively affected by this. Even if the game was universally reviled, its disappearance would only be a net negative to the cultural significance of video games. It's an example of how anti-consumer practices can actually be a major detriment to the history of video games. Any multiplayer-focused games. Multiplayer games have a host of new challenges for those wishing to preserve them. Multiplayer games often have to run on a server, and people would need to play on those servers. As the years go by, more and more people may leave a game behind, decreasing the player base of the game, and the developer/publisher may choose to start shutting down servers for the game to save cost. Eventually, this will lead to a situation where the game becomes unplayable in a way that it was intended. Take the currently massive popular shooter Rainbow Six Siege. Siege currently boasts high player counts and will thrive for years to come, but eventually that player base is going to dry out. Ubisoft may release a new successor to Siege, or the servers may shut down altogether and no one will be able to see what all the fuss was about. Same idea applies to MMO games and other online games. A concrete example includes the PS3 exclusive game MAG, which had its server shut down in 2014, rendering the game completely unplayable. Solutions to this conundrum involves allowing players to host their own servers, or even implementing a bot system for the game. These solutions allow the game to be able to be played years after official support has dried up. But at this current point in time, these solutions are not being considered just yet. Remasters and remakes. If you follow the games industry, you may have noticed the resurgence in the remaster or remake genre. Game publishers have found out that it's financially lucrative to touch up an existing game and re-release it for a current-gen device. Sometimes they'll go a step further and remake the game itself to provide an updated experience. These remasters and remakes have been hugely successful, so much so that it's resulted in renewed interest in particular series such as Crash Bandicoot. It's important to note, however, that remakes are a sidestep in the preservation process of video games. When one is to remake something, you're creating something new using fundamental ideas of the old, using techniques of the present. Sometimes you may decide to create an entirely new gameplay experience instead, with one example being the Resident Evil remakes. While it's fantastic to receive a reimagining of these old titles, it's still important that people can play those old titles just as they were made. Remakes are not meant to replace the game, but instead provide a new interpretation of it. Night Dive Studios, for example, have remastered several old school shooters from the past and brought them to modern operating systems. These include Quake, Blood, Sin, Turok, Doomed 64, etc. For most of these games, you can also choose to play them in DOSBox as they were originally designed for. You also have games such as the Mega Man Legacy Collection, which not only brought Mega Man 1 through 6 to modern systems, but also brought with it features such as exclusive concept art, challenge modes, and other exclusive features. Despite all those features, these are the games people remember from all those years ago. The only issue with remasters and remakes is that they are often designed for console systems, and these console systems usually only circulate for around 10 to 15 years. Once that happens, the remaster process has to begin anew, and consumers have to count on the developers to port those remasters to the updated devices. Still, remasters and remakes are a good step in the right direction for video game preservation. Releasing the source code. One other solution is to release the source code of the game itself. Source code is the code created before being interpreted by a computer's compiler to create the game. In a sense, it is the recipe the computer uses to create the game. Source code, however, is often a subject of a legal debate. You may find many game developers release their source code for free or with legal catch. Doom, Quake, Rise of the Triad had their source code released to be modified well into the future. Some programs such as Unreal Engine also allow you to access the source code in order to design and program to fill your needs. The important part to note here, however, is that the source code is the purest form of the game pre-compiled. It is how the game is before it got released. When given to the public can then keep the game thriving and, most importantly, preserve it well into the future, adjusting for operating system updates and other technical challenges. Most AAA games nowadays often don't release their source code for either security or anti-piracy measures. Still, it's worth discussing as another potential solution for the issue of game preservation. Emulation. Emulation is perhaps the most widely understood medium of game preservation out there, and is probably the most effective way to preserve a game. To begin with, emulation is not piracy and it's not illegal. Emulation is merely a piece of software that aims to mimic another program or operating system. The most well-known ones out there include Dolphin for GameCube and Wii, and MAME, which emulates arcade games. To go one step beyond, these emulators are built to emulate and then some. The Dolphin emulator, for example, can play any GameCube game you feed it and even upscale it to 4K and give it better anti-aliasing. Furthermore, these emulators run on a computer that are designed to mimic a gaming system. Remember, the problem with many retro games is that if you don't have the device, you can't play the game. Therefore, emulators provide a way to play these games without needing to track down the original systems they ran on. It's also important to know that unlike porting a remaster to a new generation of consoles, emulation software can theoretically be ported to new generations while retaining the games themselves. Lastly, emulators are emulating a game the way it was made. When you emulate a game, you're playing it as people did back when it was released, albeit with quality of life updates. Some companies have embraced the emulation method, while others have ostracized it. PlayStation attempted emulation for their PlayStation Classic release to mixed reception, while Xbox has emulation included with their latest console for Xbox 360 and Xbox One titles to stellar results. Nintendo has always ostracized emulation, however, and has often gone after ROM sites even if the games were no longer in circulation. Video games, just like books and movies, should be openly available for those people looking to enjoy them. There are dozens of options for people who are looking for a particular old movie or book or album, but video games are not afforded that same luxury. If a player wants to play an older video game that has not been made available on modern platforms, the only legal way to accomplish that is to track down the console and a physical copy of the game they wish to play, or travel to the actual Library of Congress and hope it's stored there. Obviously, this is neither practical nor helpful. With better video game preservation efforts, it would not only save these pieces of art from being lost, but also make these games available for everyone who wants to experience them. Successful preservation efforts could open the door for even local libraries to have a selection of games for people to check out, just like you would with books and movies. It could also help players create a massive digital library that would allow players to just log in and rent retro games along with a reliable way to play them. It would create a way for everyone to reliably and legally experience games from their childhood or play the hidden gems that get lost in the sea of releases. Preservation helps ensure that the most interactive artistic medium is never lost, and more importantly, it would allow the next generation to experience everything the medium has to offer without having to jump difficult hurdles or spend a lot of money. Video game preservation ensures that video games will always be there to inspire future generations of game designers, developers, and creators. Video game preservation is important. They are made with the effort of many individuals and are of historic significance. Like film before, video games tell us about the cultural expression of humanity through the lens of video games. Failure to preserve video games risks losing a major chapter of humanity's history, especially as video games become more and more popular with the general public. The attempts to preserve video games through emulation, release of source code, remasters and remakes are steps in the right direction to ensure future generations can enjoy games as we did in the past. Those who choose to enact destructive policies that lead to games lost forever into the ether only serve to destroy a major chapter of humanity's history and should be discouraged vehemently.